thank you for tuning in to the Dr. Chris Radio of Horror Show. If you're not catching this recorded interview live, hopefully you're catching it on the Radio of Horror YouTube channel or radioofhorror.wordpress.com. Tonight on the show is an author that I've wanted to have on the show for many years. I first found her book when I was 14 or 15 years old, when I was going to a private school in Waynesboro, Virginia, at a library, and I was looking for vampire novels, and all I kept finding was Anne Rice's stuff, or things I've already read by R.L. Stine or Christopher Pike. And I came across this vampire book by Traci Briery, who's on the show with us now to talk about her time as an author and writing Vampire Memoirs. Thank you for coming on the show with us, Traci. Thanks for tracking me down and finding me and inviting me on. Absolutely. I have been a big fan of this book. I wasn't able to obtain a copy of it until years later when the internet made it much easier to find old books, because I'd go to used bookstore after used bookstore to try and find a copy of this book that I saw in the library. And like, memory is fleeting. Even when you're like going from a teenager to your 20s, you're trying to remember stuff that you were passionate about years ago. And there's still like one or two books that I would love. I have the picture of the book in my head, but I don't have the title in my head. But this was a book that I maintained in memory because I read it 2 or 3 times in high school, and I absolutely loved it. Oh, that's great. Yeah, this actually, I mean, it's my first book, so it does have that whole, you know, the nostalgic aspect, you know, the favorite kid type of thing. But I did write this one first, and then I wrote three more after that. So it's every now and then I come across someone says I read that thing and I loved it. And I've seen some bad reviews occasionally. You can get it on Amazon now, I think. Yes. Probably not new, but I know there's at least things like Amazon make it possible to find these days. Off the air, when I contacted you, you said that you published this while you were still in college? I wrote it when I was still in college, and then it was published after I got out. So that's when I had a little more time to start looking, you know, when I was able to finish it, and then start looking into actually how to submit manuscripts to publishers and things, which was the way it was done back then. In retrospect, I kind of wonder how the heck did I do all of this stuff without the internet? And you say that you submitted manuscripts to publishers. This novel, I believe, I have it right here in front of me, is 430 something pages, give or take. Yeah. Was it always that long, or was it longer or shorter? Oh, it was a lot longer. I had a whole lot more stuff in there. In fact, I think it was a potential agent who read it, and she just, we got on a phone call. She just tore into it. She didn't end up being my agent, but her feedback was brutal, but it was also, you know, stinging. And then I sat down and I started looking through it, going like, yeah, this can go, this can go, this can go. I mean, there's a lot more for the stuff she did not growing up, but just going through time. And then I even had a section about werewolves. I thought, let's put werewolves into this world. And then I took that out because I wasn't going to do anything else with it other than just have an encounter. So I took quite a lot out of it. I think it was more like 800 pages by the time I finally got through with it. You know, I wrote 2 more. The last 2 books I wrote were actually about werewolves, and officially the 2 creatures exist in my world, but I just, for whatever reason, didn't have them interact with each other, or didn't really have any sort of connection with different characters, but they do exist. So if I felt like continuing that, I'd probably have them meeting each other, like a lot of these sorts of stories do. You know the I forget the name, but it's with Kate Beckinsale, and I forget the name of the series she was in. You know, the vampires and the werewolves fighting each other and all this, and then the Twilight series and so on. Be a little bit more different, though. I don't know. I try to do something different. I never read the werewolf books, actually. I only recently found out about those when I was trying to track you down. Oh, okay. That's okay. There was the concept of that is that they were able to be aware. I think ultimately I came up with werewolves who could transform at will. Mm-hmm. If they weren't fighting against the transformation, eventually they could transform at will, and they were aware of what's going on. Did you ever So here's one little funny thing I would like to point out about everybody who does read books currently, especially paperbacks. So the retail price of your book when was this published? 1992? 1991. Yeah, first printing, March 1991. What I was doing in March of 1991, I was moving from Massachusetts to... No, wait, March 1991. No, I wasn't moving yet. But I was in the... I want to think... was in the 5th grade? Yes, I was in the 5th grade. My exposure to vampires was very small. Very, very small. Like, I had seen Fright Night, and I had seen Fright Night Part 2, and I'd seen My Best Friend is a Vampire and Once Bitten, and I think Dracula had a half-hour kind of comedy, kind of action-adventure TV series at the time. But that's pretty much it. The Lost Boys. I think I had seen The Lost Boys. I may have seen The Lost Boys. I'm not 100% certain yet. I definitely had seen a few episodes of Forever at Night and didn't understand what that was about. But
I saw that.
and I saw that in here, by the way, before we get to the thing I was going to make a joke about, was that you dedicated this to Tom Holland, who I've also had on my show, and GM Dave Mateus, who just came on a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And we actually are going to plan to have JM on a podcast I do that covers his run of Spectacular Spider-Man. But the thing I was going to get to was the price of this book in 1991 was $4.95. I don't know how many books you buy today, but do you know what the price of a book like this would cost today?
Probably more.
About $10. A paperback book I don't see go below almost $10 anymore these days.
Oh, okay. Well, inflation. I see my copy is $6.
Ah, gotcha.
About right.
Now, you published this through Zebra Publishing, which was very famous in the 80s and 90s for publishing horror books. They were huge in that realm. Tor Publishing and Zebra were big in the horror genre.
Yeah. They seem to have a whole bunch of different names. There's Kensington, Zebra, Pinnacle. That seems to be all of these together. I saw Penguin at one point. They all together have published my books. Seems to be the one group. There were a couple of stings that I got. There was Harlan Ellison, as you know, is can be a rather caustic individual, or could be. He had his own show on Sci-Fi, or not his own show, but he had like 10 minutes with Harlan sort of thing on Sci-Fi Channel. And he just started ranting about people basically writing garbage. And he said, some guy said, hey, I got a $1,500 advance from Kensington or something, or Zebra or something like that. And then he said he was making that much back in 1960 or 1950 or so. And I went, ooh, because that's what my advance was $1,500.
Your advance for the book to publish it was $1,500, so $1,500?
Yeah.
Wow, that's kind of low.
Yeah.
It was what, 1990? Mm-hmm. $1,500 would that pay your rent?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, really? That rent costs were that low back then?
Yeah, it would have paid my rent in 1990. Yeah, $1,500. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, yeah. When you think about it, I mean, depending where you live in the country, rent costs vary. I mean, I had a friend that moved from Boston to Michigan because she's like, I pay $1,800 a month in rent to live in Boston, the city of Boston. I found the exact same place to live in Michigan, and I don't have any ties here other than my friends to Massachusetts. My family's kind of scattered throughout the country, and she moved to Michigan. And she's like, I pay half the rent now, and I could still do my job because I'm in marketing. I don't have to live in Boston to do my job.
90, I think my rent was somewhere like about maybe $800 or something. It was not that high.
Where did you base the character? Where did you create the character from? Which, by the way, go into the story of who the authors are of this book.
Oh, yeah. Well, the first book, The Vampire Memoirs, which was not my title, by the way, I'll get to that. I actually says by Mara McCuniff and Traci Briery. Now, I named myself last because this is kind of my poking at the time of autobiographies. They would always say, famous person with another person. And I learned eventually that the other person was always the one who actually did all of the writing. So maybe they interviewed the famous person, but I wanted to make it just kind of a little poke at that, the idea that maybe it's me sitting there listening to Mara's life story or whatever, and then I ended up writing it down, whereas I ended up writing it. Mara got a lot more fan mail than I did, by the way. And just for fun, I ended up coming up with 2 different signatures. So if somebody wanted me to sign the book, I would sign as both people, and her signature was very different than mine. So just to kind of make fun of that sort of thing. But the people who thought she was real was just thought, you know, this is a vampire. This is not a real person. But I don't know. You know, I would humor them. If they wrote to Mara, I would write back as her. If they wrote to me, then I'd write back as me. So, you know, I could do both voices in that sense. I wrote it when I was in UCLA on my, you know, sturdy Apple IIc computer, and then bits of typewriter. And she actually is just kind of the culmination of just a whole lot of the same sort of character that I had in my head over the years, you know, before she actually got the name Mara. You know, my fan fiction character, I would read the X-Men and put in my own X-Men character, or whatever I was into.
I have a funny interjection to your story real quick, because if I don't get it out now, I won't remember it. So what you just said about interjecting your character into the X-Men, no joke. Back in the 1990s, remember there was a Fox animated X-Men cartoon series, which is still pretty revered today?
Yeah.
Despite any of and all of its flaws, which you can go to the backstory and the history of the X-Men animated series, boy, there's a whole book by the way, right now about the history of the cartoon and the flaws in animation and the problems they had early on and how it got better by the end of the first season. Anyway, so there was the character Jubilee, who was the new character. She'd been around in the comics for a few years, but she was the new character that young kids could see themselves in watching the cartoon, because they made all the X-Men the adults, which is what they should be, right? I wrote a fan fiction character that was a vampire mutant that fell in love with Jubilee and turned her into a vampire, and they had X-Men adventures, but the other X-Men didn't trust him, and he was a mutant, but she fell in love with him, and that's why she became a vampire. Years later, they would turn Jubilee into a vampire when she lost her powers due to M-Day, which was the giant No More Mutants plotline of the Scarlet Witch, which is, you know, possibly being reflected right now in WandaVision. That's very funny when you talk about how you injected your own character into X-Men. I did the same thing.
Yeah, it just variations, you know. She just kind of morphed into that, and the name Mara actually came from a schoolmate who, you know, people typically would just naturally pronounce it as Mara, but she was just fiercely protective of the pronunciation of her name. She, you know, anyone who dared to call her Mara would get a talking to, and she was very insistent that it be Mara. And I thought, well, I like the name. I mean, wasn't based on her at all. I just liked the name. And then McCuniff came later, you know, so that's the name she ends up with near the end. But ironically, the name McCuniff is the last name of a person in high school who, I wouldn't call him a bully, but let's just say I was not treated with respect by that person in high school, but not actively bullied. But I liked the last name, so I just gave her that last name because I thought it was unusual. But she just kind of culmination. Now I refer to Mara as my literary stunt double. I put her in. She's not based on my personality at all. She, you know, so she's not like the Mary Sue Avatar, you know, sort of fan fiction thing that people often do. When I write a story about her, I'm not writing a story about myself, but I call her my literary stunt double because she can do the things I can't, so to speak. Have personality traits that just aren't in me, or do things that I just simply wouldn't do.
Are you saying you don't scoff at the sight of water or what is it, crosses and stuff like that? One of the things in your book that I thought was kind of fascinating and is, have you ever heard of the video game or the terrible movie series Blood Rain?
I've heard of it. Yeah, I didn't play it or watch the show or anything like that, but I have heard of it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but in your book, do vampires fear water like it can, just regular water hurts them?
I didn't really have, I thought about whether or not that I would include that, but I would say no, because I didn't really come up with a situation like that.
Okay, all right, so my memory is fleeting. It's been a little while since I've read the book. Yeah. I do remember there's a scene where she goes into a church, and she thought churches would engulf her into flames, and then she's able to enter the church with no problem, so she was fed a lot of BS by her creator.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I wanted to. That was kind of a that was a weird thing where I was actually thinking of writing kind of a barbarian, you know, Conan, the barbarian sort of thing, and I like that. And I wanted to come up with this female barbarian. I read Sonia Sort, even though she's. I didn't explain. I didn't really give any hints to her appearance other than that she's tall and has green eyes, but she is blonde, but doesn't have to be. That makes sense. I thought, oh, I want to write a barbarian story. And then just one night, just this snap time jump had me where it's Mara like leaving a suicide note for a lover because she says something like, I've lived too long, I'm going to go out and watch the sun rise. And that's, and in my head, I was like, where did that come from? Because in my head, it was like, it was the same Mara that I was writing about. You know, this warrior woman sort of character that she begins as. And then suddenly I said, wait, why is she, what happened there? Why is she still alive centuries later? Why is she going to go out and see the sun? Because I was into vampires at the time. I thought, oh, somewhere along the line she became a vampire. And it kind of went from there. And I just wrote the story about how she becomes one. But yeah, I tried to do some character building. I didn't want her to just show up in Vampire Land and get bitten or whatever.
Vampire Land.
Yeah. The crosses, though, if in the beginning she has her friend who comes to visit her who did have a cross and it did hurt her. Put that away, I can't look at it. That's because she was still more or less under the Agyar's control. Or just kind of still new and still trying to figure out what she is and that kind of thing. So it's kind of like it's based on what kind of a person that you are. If you're an evil vampire, then anything that's good is going to harm you or, you know, be dangerous. So it's just kind of like a sign of her growing goodness, if that makes sense.
Now, you mentioned being a fan of X-Men. Did you ever read the Dracula issue with Storm?
Yeah, where he ends up converting her, as I use my own term.
Yes, yes, and Kitty goes out after her, and of course no one believes that she could possibly be turning into a vampire, which is the most ridiculous thing of writing ever, because you live in a world where Spider-Men exist, and Thunder Gods, and Galactus has tried to come to eat the Earth. Are you kidding me that you don't think vampires exist?
Yeah.
And all the time that Wolverine has been alive, I mean, come on.
Like specific denial or something like that.
Right. So there's a great scene in it where Wolverine uses his adamantium claws to make a cross, and Dracula's like, that doesn't work on me, you idiot. You don't believe. But Nightcrawler, who looks like a blue furry demon, has such a devoted faith in Catholicism and in Jesus and God. He's able to pick up Kitty's like stakes and form a cross, and like light kind of shines from it at Dracula. Dracula's all like, ah!
I remember that story where he says, then, you know, screw you, for I believe, or something.
Right, and Dracula's reaction is, how can a foul blue-furred demon such as yourself have faith in the Lord? And he's like, because I believe the Lord loves all his creations, no matter what they look like. And he's driving Dracula back, which is a great moment. And that actually also made me completely fall in love with the character of Kurt Wagner. And every time he's ever been portrayed, I'm always like a stickler, like, you better get this right, because Kurt is a great character. He's a guy that looks like a damn demon, but he has such faith in God, is such a great contrast. So, back to your book, though.
He's my favorite X-Men, by the way.
Oh, he is? That's fantastic. What was the conscious decision to make her, and this is not sex-shaming anybody, but what's the conscious decision to make her a prostitute, a whore?
Oh, in the later years.
The later years, yes, when she has to provide for, and she's living in, like, you know, she's got the powers of a vampire. She could easily, like, memorize some rich dude, kill him, or make him, like, go away and inherit his lavish mansion and all his money and live perfectly. But she lives in squalor in a basement with an adopted child eventually, and I mean, she's a prostitute, and it's like she doesn't need to do this. She has hypnotizing powers. And as long as she's going to be a good girl, she can use her hypnotizing powers to get what she wants in good ways.
Yeah. Well, I consider that to be a flaw or a lack of imagination on my part too. Is, you know, what could someone like her really do and still try to at least hold on to some amount of morality? And I actually had a discussion with my history professor. I told you I was writing this, and I actually Eugene Weber, who was quite a prominent historian, was my one of my professors at UCLA. You know, if you look him up, he's passed away now, but he's quite well known. And he thought of something like, well, if you don't want her to just kind of take over somebody's castle or just go and you know, have a rampage of terror and whatnot, why don't you just do something like have her, you know, she could be a prostitute and just kind of take their money and be done with it and live that way. She actually did live, she got quite a lot of money, you know, actually. But I had a scene at one point where she was outside and there was some other vampire that she recognized, someone who had obviously made a name for himself, so to speak.
Right. Yeah, I remember. He's like, why are you living like this?
Like this? And she's like, my conscience is clear, was essentially what her answer was. And he's like, filth, you know, and then wanders away because she's wasting her power, whereas in reality, she was old enough to pretty much just turn him into dust. It's kind of my it's my own lack of imagination, though. I'll blame that. You know, why did she live in squalor versus just even still being a good person? But that's why I had where she eventually finds somebody who's able to help her, you know, invest and do investments for her and that kind of thing, and live off of that. And then, of course, the Great Depression happens and she loses all of her money. Things of that nature. But that's just me being a kid who didn't quite know all the ways somebody could really make a living and be wealthy without necessarily being evil, that kind of thing. So I'll take the hits for that one.
There's no hits to it because I don't think there's any shame in doing that, but it definitely at the time, yeah, I didn't know anything about like sex work and prostitution and blah 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 blah. I'm not going to get into that entire conversation. I'm not going to touch that. But at the time I was reading it when I was a teenager, I that really was like, why doesn't she just use her hypnotizing powers to, like, if she's like banging dudes, just seduce one to get his money, and then she can live a life of luxury without living in a rat-infested horse nest. Yeah. And this poor girl that she adopted is like, oh, you know, Louis and Lestat adopt Claudia, and they're still living in squalor. And it's like, guys, you're a vampire. Live it up. Stop living in garbage.
Yeah. Well, I would. There's a lot of it that I would want to rewrite where she would be living a lot better.
Right. There's definitely two parts of the story I would love to have seen expanded upon. And if you do have an extended version of the novel, I do hope to see it published one day. Is one, her time when she first starts becoming a vampire, I think is some of the best parts of the book. She, you know, when she's like thrust upon with that girl and she's like, I'm supposed to feed you. And she's like, feed me? Okay, go get me some food. And she's like, no, you're supposed to like take it from me. And she's like, what? And she's not, you know, understanding quite yet because her memories have all been screwed up becoming a vampire. I thought that is my favorite part of the book, where she's just like, I'm sorry, and then like attacks and kills the girl and turns her into, you know, and then she's like, no, keep her, I need a friend, so you're gonna turn her into a vampire too. And then later on, when we finally get to the present day and she's in college and she's trying to get a degree, and then she's getting like a degree in like teaching, and she's gonna teach history. I love that whole part. That was my favorite part of the whole book.
Oh, okay. I think the moments with Lara, and yeah, it is pronounced Lara, not Lara. Lara, the servant girl. She didn't want one of those mindless creatures that were, you know, that Agar surrounded himself with.
Yeah, like they were like Gollum style, right?
Yeah, they were just these creatures that he would just kind of send out to terrorize the people or whatnot, that he couldn't bring himself to destroy for some reason. But yeah, and there were elements that if I rewrote it, I would have more of the sense of maybe her having nightmares about him, you know, before seeing him, you know, because he says, I dreamed of, you know, I had dreams about you, sort of thing. So I probably would have had something added. Maybe she has nightmares about some mysterious man, but doesn't tell her husband because she doesn't want to give him any reason to think she's, you know, thinking about another man, you know. when this is from her perspective, these dreams would have come out of nowhere, right? And then when she sees him, when they go across the sea, and then she would see him and then be really uncomfortable. So I wrote it in first person, although now when I write stories, I don't write in first person anymore. I write in I think the voice is called third person limited.
Something like that. Yeah, because when I was writing Vlada, I wrote the entire thing in the present tense, and the person editing it said, you can do that. People have done it, but I'm just warning you right now, every book is supposed to be written in the past tense. And I'm like, unless you're writing in the first person. And I'm like, you mean like it's Vlada's thoughts? And I was like, oh my crap, I had an opportunity to write this entire book from Dracula's perspective, which I don't think has really been done. It's usually like the surrounding characters talking about him. And as much as of a voice I gave her, I really should have written the entire events from her perspective. And I was thinking about this after rewatching, I don't know if you're a big movie fan or a Marvel comic book fan. You said you are. Have you seen Infinity War, Avengers?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so the primary character in that movie is Thanos. In fact, a lot of that movie is told from his perspective. And the Avengers are reacting to what he is doing, which is great, which is what makes that movie work so well. You know, for the first time, we're getting it from the villain's perspective. It opens and ends with him. But, you know, we still are obviously giving perspectives of events that he's not around for. You know, he's not around for when Cap goes back to Wakanda or when Cap reunites with, like, a Hulk and so on and so forth. But I thought about that afterwards going, wow, I should have written this entire story from Vlad's perspective. Like, everything is happening in the events of the book, gender swapped, but from her point of view, seeing them happen. And I do in certain times in my book, but not always. And I'm now thinking about that and going, well, it's too late. We're going to print this thing next week. The time we're recording this, on the 31st of January, we're about to print this thing. We're like days away from printing. So, or sending it to the printer to get printed. So I'm like, well, I guess I'll do that for the next time. But yeah, I absolutely love that it's told in her perspective. Was there ever an audiobook?
No. I know you'd asked me about that earlier. I did not record it or find somebody who would read it, and it would be someone who either is English or could do an impeccable English accent, because I imagined her living, doing all of this in England, and then she ends up moving to America.
Right.
So I figured she'd be someone who still who's retained her accent.
Right, definitely. Now that makes sense. Or somebody that can do a convincing enough English accent that doesn't sound hokey and stupid.
Right.
Now, the one criticism I have isn't about this book, but the sequel. I read the sequel, and I immediately got rid of my copy. Okay. I was not a fan of the sequel. I like the fact that we got the backstory of, what was the character's name that was her opposite?
Traci.
Right. I thought it was great we got her backstory, but when we get to the part where she is killed off, and then she comes back, and then she's in a world where there's like a vampire government, and Mara has no vampire abilities anymore, and a daughter, I lost my mind. I was like, what is going on? And this is before True Blood, this book came out. So True Blood, I think, was one of the first big media properties to do vampires of, like, they're minorities, like black people, or Jewish people, or gay people. Vampires exist. Yeah. That was the first, I think, big, huge story in which vampires were everyday people walking around at night. Right?
Right.
So when you did it, I was like, that kind of took me out of it. I've always thought vampires should just always be like hidden and unknown. You know what I mean? They got their society, but when you did this whole vampire society is integrated with ours, and she goes and finds Mara and beats the crap out of her, and then they've got, she's got a daughter, and it's possibly the daughter of the long dead husband from years ago. I was like, what is going on in this book?
Yeah, I won't try to defend it. It's definitely some Act 4 weirdness that I came up with, but and considering that she's just completely out of it. I mean, she's gone for years and just trying to figure out what the hell's going on, and so that's why she's so furious and blames Mara for everything and beats her up. But yeah, but then it's kind of like retconning it that nope, I'm gonna forget about that, and Mara's gonna keep going. So I'm cool with that. That's fine.
I'm a huge fan of the work, but halfway through when she gets to her resurrection, how she comes back to life and she crawls her way out of the ground, that was really cool, because I was like, oh, where is this going? She's not really dead? That's awesome. And then she comes back to a world where vampires have their own government, their own sheriffs, their own laws. And I was like, okay, that's interesting new direction that she took. She went into a sci-fi era of the book that you never had before, because that's really science fiction. When you start getting into the future, that's sci-fi. You know what I mean? We don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. And, you know, we're living in a sci-fi world right now with a pandemic.
Yeah. I wouldn't adapt that one into anything. That's fine. But the Vampire Memoirs is one that I was hoping would be picked up by Hollywood and have a script and all that stuff. Never did.
Did you ever get an option? Did you ever have anyone come to you and say, "Hey, here's $1,200 million, you know, whatever. Here's some money. We want to buy the rights, and in 5 years we don't make it, you get the rights back." And you were like, "Sure. How much?" Yeah, $1 million, absolutely. 5 years later, well, best $1 million I ever made. Because that's what happens with options. If they don't turn it into something, that's it. Now, I have no idea how things are going to go today. You know what I mean? With the pandemic killing Hollywood every 5 minutes and everything on streaming, you're wondering, is anyone getting options to turn stuff into properties anymore? Yes, but it's so different than it was when you published this book.
Yeah. I was hoping it would be, you know, picked up by somebody. I wasn't even sure to send it to, and my agent wasn't really helpful with that, you know, to try to get it anywhere. I took a screenwriting class at UCLA, and that's who the Luce Newman is, who's mentioned in my credits there, and he was my screenwriting professor. So that's actually the first version of the story, is me writing a screenplay for it. And I read the first scene to my classmates, and they liked it. And he read the whole darn thing, and had various comments about it. So if you say, "Oh wow, where is it?" It's going to take me. It would take me a while to find. It's buried somewhere in my storage. And then I ended up writing the book. So it's kind of like if Hollywood said, "Hey, we want to adapt it," and I would say, "Here it is," you know. But they didn't. They didn't come calling. They wanted the Anne Rice stuff. I haven't actually read Anne Rice, just so you know.
Yeah, no, it's too bad. And I understand there is some sappy stuff in here, but, you know, whatever. Yeah. It's honestly, I can't get into Anne Rice's stuff nearly as much as I could get into yours and like a book by Christopher Pike called The Last Vampire, if you've ever read that.
Don't think I did, but I did read who was one of the authors you mentioned at the very beginning?
Oh, R.L. Stine wrote Goodnight Kiss.
R.L. Stine, and I wrote there was like not vampire detective, but he was like a journalist who becomes a vampire.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. And then there's also Anita Blake, Vampire Hunter. No, I'm sorry, not Anita Blake. Sonia Blue by what's her name? Nancy Collins.
Okay.
Her vampire hitman, bodyguard, assassin, I forget what she is. Sonia Blue. That was also very interesting, and I could immerse myself into that. Goodnight Kiss was teenage vampires. It was also part of the Fear Street line. So they mention events from Fear Street. Oh, I live on Fear Street. Ooh, it's connected. Even though they're not anywhere near Fear Street, it's part of the Fear Street line because they mentioned Fear Street. And that was about two vampires who make a bet. Two boy vampires who were just like, so you got to convert a guy and a girl, and I got to convert a girl. No, it's a boy. Oh, sorry, it's a male and female vampire. And they're like, they make a bet. Whoever can turn somebody by sometime wins the bet. I don't know what the winning of the bet would entail. It's like, what, do I get their friends to eat them or something? But it was teenage vampires, and I could like see myself in those characters. And then the sequel was one of the two turned vampire. One of the two who got turned is now making the same bet with a couple of twin female vampires. You know, oh, I could turn somebody before you can. And I absolutely love that. I got more into that than I ever did the wishy-washy romance of Anne Rice's books. I had to reread those when I was an adult, and I've only read like 2 or 3 of them. But definitely, I could not read those as a kid. It was just too much melodrama for me.
Yeah, the melodrama. That's a good term, and I wasn't really.
There's also Vampire Twins. That's the other one I couldn't think of.
Yeah, it didn't really appeal to me, and then the segue with because Anne Rice is so popular. She had her, was it Vampire Diary? I don't remember what it's called, but so my working title for the first book was called Night Life: A Love Story for Children of the Night, which is kind of a whimsical thing. And then they came back and said, no, we're going to call it the Vampire Memoirs. So in case you don't know, about publishers, they'll change all sorts of things about a book. Besides doing the editing, they'll change your title. They decide what your title is and what the cover is going to be and how to market it and that sort of thing. So I wanted it to be called Nightlife, but they said we're going to call it the Vampire Memoirs. And at the time, I wasn't particularly enamored of the Anne Rice style, and so I said, is that because you want people to think of her books? And I got in an argument with my publisher about that, and they won, obviously, and they have the cover, and they said, here's your cover, do you think I love it? And I was like, this is not Mara, so this looks exactly like I pictured Teresa, though, who shows up at the end. And then the Vampire Journals is a different look of, they said this is what Teresa looks like. Like, no, that's actually more like what Mara looks like. So whatever, you put the two different characters in each other's books. So this is something that they do. They change these titles, but partly because these are the Anne Rice vampire scene. Some of them had a lot of angst, but a lot of them were really into it. Lestat ended up getting really into it. Louis not so much. And I was getting kind of frustrated with the whole notion of vampires who were just flat out evil, and I think, well, there's no explanation. They get changed, but why are they so evil? Your diet changed. Now you need blood, but why does that make you evil? And that's why I gave J.M. DeMatteis props for Greenberg, the Vampire, because I saw that graphic novel, which I think was in 1986 here. He signed it, too. He signed my copy. Yay. 1986, the whole idea of vampires who were what they were, but they still had their own personality. So if they were nasty, they were nasty. If they were good people, they still tried to be good. They didn't become soulless, horrible creatures. I like that. So I kind of stole that concept and put that into the Vampire Memoirs of, okay, how do I have Mara and still have her be likable? Where she's struggling with this, the blood, needing blood for food, that kind of thing. So that's why I gave him props. Although I did like Fright Night just because it was a fun movie.
Yeah, Fright Night and Fright Night Part 2 are two of my favorite vampire movies ever.
Yeah, those are wonderful films, and of course you have Jerry, who's just flat out evil. But I just really love the books, and even though it didn't necessarily influence how I wrote, I said, hey, this is my favorite vampire movie, so I'm going to give him props for it. So we're going to meet. Tom. I hope Tom Holland's still alive. I actually don't remember.
Tom Holland is still alive. Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry if I said anything.
No, he came on my show about 4 years ago, and all right. He is supposedly working on a Fright Night another Fright Night movie to directly follow the second one, or well, the first one. The second one's got copyright issues, and it's a whole story I'm not even going to get into. I've talked about before, but in fact, Regine, the actress who played Regine, came on my show. And we talked about that as well.
Oh, okay.
Julie Carmen.
Yeah, I saw the remake too, and I liked it.
Yeah, I like the remake. Don't ever watch the sequel remake, Fright Night Part 2 from the 2000s. That is terrible.
I missed it.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Don't ever watch it. Don't even try to track it down. So that way it's not even in a blip in your memory. Because I watched it. It is garbage. It's so bad. Anyway, what have you been working on the last several years? Anything? And have you ever thought about... Oh, sorry. And there's the second part of the question. Have you ever thought about publishing the extended version of the Vampire Memoirs?
Oh, well, I would have to write it.
I thought you said there was like I thought you said there was a longer version of the book you had.
Oh, well, I mean, that was the unedited version. I mean, there's just stuff that I removed. I don't think I kept the removed chapters.
Got it.
Though, but I was more like if I do this, like what if... I haven't written anything professionally since I published the last book, the werewolf things, but I've, the problem is that my interest keeps shifting. So for instance, for a long time I was into sculpting. I was just constantly sculpting things and doing custom dolls and so on. Now I like Legos a lot, but I also have gone back to writing where, I'll have to say fan fiction, which I fought against writing anything, but I also have Mara's in another story that I've been doing chapters little by little on one of those, fan fiction sites, but it's original work. It's not a fan fiction, but it's just kind of a reworking of Mara as like in medieval times. So she is, commoner. It's the whole Cinderella kind of thing. A commoner becomes a princess, and so I'm writing that story where she ends up marrying someone without knowing at all that he's royalty, and just how the life after that. So I've just been kind of writing her story, but it's still essentially the same character. It's still Mara. It's still her personality. It's just in a different genre. And I toyed with the idea of still making her a vampire or something like that, but I ended up not doing that. So she's just going to stay human and still be in Middle Ages, still be a princess trying to do good. So Nightcrawler is my favorite X-Men, but Superman is my favorite superhero, because he's a person with godlike abilities, enormous power, but if written right, he is also just exceedingly humble. He is insanely humble and good. He's just, the Boy Scout. I like characters like that. That's why, for instance, Mara is an insanely powerful vampire, but doesn't use it to harm others. She tries to help people.
Yeah, 1,600 years old, according to the book cover.
Yeah.
By the way, who is the... I know it's a drawing, but is there anyone that the drawing of the Vampire Memoirs is based on, of the cover?
No, I mean, the Vampire Memoirs is the brunette woman, who's looking very sexy, and they hire cover artists to do these things, so there's no input into it. When I looked at it, I said, well, that's how I picture Teresa, but that's not the main character. Teresa, who shows up near the end.
Who's the artist, too, by the way? Because the inside copyright doesn't list who the artist is.
Does it?
Nope.
Yeah, that's the thing, is these guys tend to be anonymous when they work in these things.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
That's too bad. There's a book that got published a couple of years ago called Paperbacks from Hell, and it's all about the art of these books, and he talks about that, saying a lot of these artists... in researching this book, I could not find the name of the artist. I mean, some people think it's like this person or think it's that person, and I was able to verify that information based on the art of the book versus like a movie poster. But he talks about like a lot of these artists were like requested to remain anonymous because working in horror and fantasy, that's gonna ruin their career. And what is all over social media and like not social media, but on every single streaming platform has their own superhero show, or they has their own fantasy show, or whatever. It's like you can't not get enough subscribers watching WandaVision right now, the Marvel comic television show.
Yes. But now they probably treated them like a typing pool or something. They just had a team of artists that they would go to and say, you do the art for this, and they don't give them credit, and that's too bad. It should be cover art by whoever, but they didn't. So, and I don't really, this is not what Mara looks like to me. It's radio. I would be showing you, like, this is what I think what Mara looks like. This is a sculpture I made of Mara from the 80s.
Very different.
Yeah, she would have looked in the 80s, or looking more like a soccer mom than anything else.
Yeah, well, considering what happens in the second novel, yeah.
Right. So, she ends up adopting 2 children and that sort of thing. So it's kind of like I did.
She adopts 2 children, except for in like the book she has like what was the name of her old husband?
Garius?
Garia's like long dead sperm still inside her or something, right?
Oh, yes, she ends up...
That was the part that I was like, what? Wait, are you trying to tell me this entire time she's been a vampire, she's had like this guy's dead seed sitting up inside her womb, waiting for her to become human again, and then just like that, she's pregnant.
Yep. Realm of science fiction. Yeah. As I said, I'm not going to try to defend any.
No, that's fine. I'm glad you're not offended by my humor.
It's like you're reminding me, like, oh my God, they're right. I ended the book like that. And I didn't even take drugs.
Well, no. The first book I think ends with her just getting married, right, to the new guy. Yeah, Jim. She gets married to Jim, and happily ever after. It's the second book when Teresa comes back to life, digging herself out of the coffin, that she's exposed to the vampire, the True Blood world, and Mara has a kid, and then it's explained about the whole thing with, like, the undead sperm, and you're like, that would not work. But magic would let it work, I guess.
Yeah, something like that. Well, she's a supernatural being, so...
Right, it would make more sense for her, like, when I was reading it, I always thought, wouldn't it make more sense that... And I didn't know when it was published, so I didn't know if the internet was even around in the second novel yet, but wouldn't it make more sense for her to be able to track down her kids long dead, like her kids are long dead, obviously, 1600 years ago or whatever it was, but her kids possibly had kids who had kids who had kids, so maybe she can be like, hey, I'm your great 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 grandmother who's a vampire, and you're my living relatives.
Yeah, find her descendants.
Right, that would have made more sense than like long dead sperm sitting in her uterus.
Yeah, something like that. I'll take it. Yeah, I'd forgotten how
It's okay. I'm just so glad you have a sense of humor about it. That has been driving me nuts for years. Going, are you kidding me?
Like I said, I would have liked to.
If you had written that today, I just do not think social media would be like, yeah, sure, that makes sense. You would be like, if it was like a TV show, there would be like GIFs made or people making YouTube videos trying to explain the science.
Oh, I don't think I would have a lot of people trying to explain it. I think they would just be making memes to make fun of it, which is fine. I took.
You'd be like, oh, that's good because now 100 more people bought the book because they made fun of it.
Oh yeah. Really, I gotta see this. Why am I just so they can make fun of it. I'm okay with that.
Traci, thank you so much for coming on the show to talk about this novel as well as your career. It's been an absolute blast to talk with you. Like I said, I've been a longtime fan of this book, and I'm definitely going to try and track down your werewolf books. I'm not the biggest werewolf fan in general. I have very niche things about werewolves I like The Howling is one of my favorite movies. And Ginger Snaps as well. American Werewolf in London, I appreciate for what it is. I do own it. I love John Landis, but I'm not the biggest fan of the movie. I like it, but I'm not like, eating up everything about the film. I own a copy and that's fine. But The Howling, absolutely. Howling 2, holy crap. That movie is so over the top, you have to love it. Also, Christopher Lee's in it, so. And also,
Howling 1 is good.
Howling 2 is more of a vampire story with werewolves.
Oh, yeah.
But I will definitely track down your werewolf books to give them a read. And, I mean, are you on any social media at all for fans to just send you, like, a hello if they want to, if they happen to listen to this and be like, oh, yeah, I read that?
Well, I am on Facebook, as you saw.
Yeah.
And, I've got the stories I mentioned were on the archive of our own. I actually call my on-screen name is Herd Thinner, Herd Thinner, like a thinner of herds. So that's my on-screen name on the archive of our own site. You could find things that way, and that's an homage to the Kevin and Kel comic strip. He has a company called Herd Thinners Inc. on the Kevin and Kel strip, so I like that. I don't know. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, I'm on Twitter, but I'm not doing anything related to my work or anything like that. I'm just kind of there. So you could send people that way if you like.
Cool. Awesome.
Facebook or archive of our own.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on the show with me, Traci.
Thanks for tracking me down.